All right, I am Mitch Maley, and welcome to this week's edition of Punk Rock Politics. I am joined, as usual, by actor and director Brendan Reagan, and we are rejoined with the feminine energy of Elsie Gilmore.
Woohoo!
All right, so big week so far. I wanted to start off with the war drums are banging again, and look, I depart from a lot of progressives in that I do believe that it's in our best interest for the U.S. military. I'm a former Army captain myself. I do believe it's in our interest and in world interest for us to maintain the preeminent military force in the world. The reason I say that is because, the example I've given a lot, or a phrase I often use is, the United States can't just be Denmark or Sweden. In fact, if there wasn't the United States, Denmark and Sweden might not be able to be Denmark and Sweden. And there's often worse actors out there, despite many of the really awful things United States foreign policy is guilty of. There's often other worse actors out there that are motivated to fill any power vacuum that we would leave and avoid. And I think that was often seen as we started to get a lot more isolationist during the Trump administration. That nativist part of retracting on the world stage can be a scary thing. Now, that said, we still could be the preeminent military force and never have to worry about our own safety for less than half of the $1.3 trillion we spend every year in defense. Go ahead.
As a progressive, can I respond to that?
Sure.
I think progressives mostly just don't want us to get into wars we don't need to.
Yes,
absolutely. There's always, conservatives like to say that liberals don't support the troops, but we actually support them so much we don't want them to die for no good reason.
Well, right. And that doesn't usually extend to the Democratic Party, which has become more hawkish.
That's why I said as a progressive.
Yes, in the last 15 years. So that's what I kind of wanted to talk about as we go into this. So, we gave some credit in the last episode that Joe Biden gave his first foreign policy speech. There wasn't much expected, but he said that we were going to cease giving offensive support to Saudi Arabia in their ongoing conflict with Yemen. Now, what was unknown at the time and reported since was that Saudi Arabia had already been signaling that they were, quote, reevaluating their situation in Yemen because they've been locked in a stalemate. So, and they've got a really serious COVID situation of their own that they're dealing with. So they're looking at that war with their southern neighbor and saying this might not be the best, expenditure of our energy. Give a real quick, synopsis of what's happening there. Yemen has been really in a bad state since about 2004, but you have these, and in 2004 you had a legislator with the last name Houthi who was persecuted and then eventually killed, a dissident, and the Houthi rebels, who are part of that movement that he started, during the Arab Spring of 2011, there was an uprising and the elected president was removed. He ended up in Saudi Arabia where he was a pro-Saudi Arabian politician, and he asked for their help to reinstall him as president. And Saudi Arabia got involved in what was really a civil war, and they have been carpet bombing a lot of innocent women and civilians with U.S. weaponry. And there have been, a lot of, General Dynamics, Boeing, a lot of companies have been involved, but there's one that stands out, and it's Raytheon. And Raytheon, 5% of their sales go to Saudi Arabia in this conflict and supporting this. And the transaction that was canceled by the Biden administration was for another $500 million in bombs to the kingdom that was approved in the final days of the Trump administration. But the CEO of Raytheon told his stock shareholders, Greg Hayes, who makes just under $20 million a year. Greg Hayes, and to give you some perspective, the average employee in these bomb factories makes $37,000 a year. So those are the U.S. jobs being created as we bomb these poor people. But he told shareholders, hey, this isn't really good for our bottom line. I'm paraphrasing that part, but what he did say was, don't worry, because it's not like peace is going to be breaking out in the Middle East anytime soon.
Yikes.
Ooh, classy.
Right? And
nothing like selling murder to your shareholders
Don't
to make
worry.
them feel better about their investments. Don't worry.
There's going to be plenty of people to blow up over there.
We're going to need more guns.
Job security.
The thing here is it reminds me a lot of what's happened with our stock market. And we talked about this a little bit last week with Alex Boyce, is that, you have this ongoing spigot of money that's just being pumped from the Federal Reserve into the markets so that people can buy and sell each other's stocks. And you have this inflation of the assets that goes up and people just keep getting richer and richer and richer. And they pat each other's on the back and say, well, it's because we're just financial wizards and all these other poor people aren't as smart and, hardworking as us. You have the same thing going on here where we started these forever wars post 9/11 with Iraq and then Afghanistan and Syria. And that war machine has created a tremendous amount of wealth for very few people at the expense of the lives and misery of others. And nobody wants to shut it off. So we get a little mileage out of saying, hey, we're not going to do this with Saudi Arabia anymore. But right at the same time, Tony Blinken, the new Secretary of State, who, by the way, guess what? Has ties to the military industrial complex as well. And Mr. Blinken says, hey, Iran is so close to having a nuclear weapon, we've got to look at that again. So we start banging those war drums. And don't worry, because our new Secretary of Defense also
used to be on the board for Raytheon.
Yes, and he needed a waiver, Lloyd Austin, because you're supposed to spend 7 years minimum as a civilian before you take that role. And the general spent less than that, but it was enough time for him to become a millionaire just from Raytheon, just from being on the board, not even working for the company, just being a board member. He made over $1.4 million, not to mention the other greasy stuff that he was involved in when in that revolving door of government. But it seems to me it's the same thing. So we talked last week about how you have all this BlackRock coming in, BlackRock execs coming into the Biden administration. And you also have all these Raytheon execs coming into the Biden administration. And this revolving door of just, hey, come here, make decisions, then go and get rich working for the people who benefited from those decisions, then come back and get promoted into a higher position and make even more decisions. This isn't going to change.
And make decisions that make all of your friends lots of money.
Yes, very rich.
That's the important thing, too, because General Austin's not going to be in that position forever. And do you think he's going to have a second post-government career? Probably. He probably will. And the people who are going to afford him that opportunity are waiting for instruction right now. Their actions are going to be dictated by his decision making. And then, you want to talk about the revolving door? He'll go right back to the private sector afterwards.
Yes, as they all will, and it's just disappointing.
But not new.
But not new.
Very not new.
No, not new. Not new at all. It's just something we have to pay closer attention to because most people don't even know that this is happening in Yemen and that the Americans are involved with it. And this started under the Obama administration in 2015. He's the one that signed off on the U.S. support for this, and we have been selling them weapons ever since. Went through the Trump administration, and again, it's hard to give Biden that much credit when it looked like, hey, we're going to make this announcement right before they're going to pull up stakes anyway. We save a little bit of face and distracts from the idea that we're also talking about how scary Iran is again.
Yeah, look, trying to take credit for something that may not be his doing is okay with me. If that's like the worst, that he's trying to slide up to the front of the press saying, hey, look, we're closing something off that was already going to be closed anyway. The problem is Iran really is a problem. The Trump administration left Biden a real mess over there. I don't think that he can steal a headline. I think he's going to have to try real diplomacy. We have Iran saying, we're not going to stop, enriching uranium. We're not going to. We started up again after Trump pulled out of the nuclear agreement. And now we're doing it. And you got to take your sanctions away. And we have the Biden administration saying, we're not going to lift a finger until you start abiding by the Iran nuclear agreement that we pulled out of in 2017 with Trump. So we've got the stalemate, and Iran is saying, hey, you're running out of time. Like, if you're gonna come back into the agreement, you got to move first. And we're at this like kind of pissing match, right, between these two countries.
Well, let's look at our relationship though with those two, because really when you look at it, we were pro-Iran for a long time, and we deposed their duly elected leader, and then we installed the Shah, a puppet government of the United States. And then when they had a popular uprising, that's what led to the theocracy that they have today. So it's a situation created by American foreign policy. And then we ditch them out and say, well, we don't want that theocracy because of all these different reasons. But at the same time, we're going to get into bed with Saudi Arabia, who's worse. I mean, by any objective measure, you look at, they lead the world in public beheadings. They have some of the absolute worst human rights violations. If you talk about rights for women in their culture, they're allowed to drive now, finally. And they also, so they provide free education in the Saudi Arabian kingdom for all of their inhabitants, all their citizenry. And do you know what the number one degree that people get with that funding is? It is a PhD in theocracy of Wahhabism, the most violent, extreme form of Islam. So you have them literally, and Wahhabism generally regards the ruling family as apostates. So they're really seeding their enemies there in this really weird house of cards they've got going on.
Well, and one of the problems with Saudi Arabia is that the royal family is really big and none of them have to work. So you have all these grown men and young men just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, learning
with billions of dollars.
And getting PhDs in, extremism. So it's just a really big recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and when you look at our place there, it's very hard to say. And if you're Iran, I'd want a nuclear weapon too, because we leave you alone once you get them. I mean, look at our foreign policy. We mostly leave nuclear countries alone. We lean really hard on ones that aren't. And, really what we're doing there is, and if you look at why we cite it with Saudi Arabia, that goes back to the early 70s, OPEC, and the pinning of the sale of oil through OPEC to the American dollar, the petrodollar, which creates a tremendous demand for U.S. dollars globally and helps support our ability to spend on the deficit. So there's something we're getting there. But more importantly, that relationship has continued to deteriorate, and China and the Russians have both made inroads in cozying up to Saudi Arabia. So there is, an argument there to be made that we're not getting that much for supporting a really awful regime over there, and we're holding them to two completely different standards, and we don't really have a leg to stand on if we say this about Iran and then say, but we're not going to mention what Saudi Arabia does.
Well, that's why running your country like a business has severe consequences, because some businesses can turn the other eye for like a big buyer. Like someone comes in and you're like, I just don't like this guy, but he buys a lot of our product and
he gets the expensive upgrades.
Yeah, he buys and he tips well, and that we're that company now, and saying, they're buying a lot. And if everything depends on how much a country is purchasing from you, well, then you've let your moral decision completely decay. You've let that go entirely. So, and then you end up with a businessman as your president who goes over there and touches glowing orbs. Was that in Saudi Arabia? The orb?
It was.
That orb photo? Yeah.
That was weird.
That.
Yeah. And doing the sword dance, because it's like, whatever seals the deal, man. You just got to go over there and play nice. I don't think Biden will touch the glowing orb. So
I don't think Trump had a lot of dignity. He was just like, tell me what to touch. I'll touch it. That's fine.
He was, I don't think that's the first time he said that either. Tell me where to touch. I'm not sure. Little man in the boat is above. I'm not sure. No, but seriously, when you think about the consequences of this sort of war for profit part of our economy, that's now become a permanent part of our economy, where a very privileged small class of people make a lot of money off of this war for profit, and they have the direct line to the White House, no matter whether it's an R or a D in there, saying, hey, we're concerned about this. And then they also have ex-employees in very powerful, important positions saying, hey, this is what we're recommending as policy, and we're supposed to be the experts. You bring us in to counsel you because no president is expected to be the expert in every field. That's troubling. And whenever I think of this, when people say, isn't there other ways to make money? It always takes me back to Orwell in 1984. And to paraphrase him, he says, war is the perfect way to redistribute wealth upward, because you spend a tremendous amount of public money that you create by not building schools, not building hospitals, not building things with social value, but by destroying things. Nothing's created. There's nothing left over when you're done that's going to elevate the other classes that could then present a threat to the status quo. Instead, you literally do the opposite. You obliterate infrastructure. Then that same class of corporations and stockholders get to profit again through the contracts to rebuild the schools and the hospitals and all the things we feel really good about.
And then Americans are like, why are we building schools in these other countries instead of in this? Right? Exactly.
We forgot to tell that part.
So we're taking the profit out of prisons apparently right now. How do we take the profit out
of
war?
Federal. That's another thing to remember. That's a good step, but we're taking federal, which there aren't that many. The vast majority of private prisons are to state level. So it's a good start, but it's just a tiny movement. It's kind of like saying, hey, we're going to stop, drilling on federal land. The vast majority of it happens on private land. Good start, but we really need to rethink, if we're going to have the kind of future that I think most people want for Americans, this idea that so much of the public treasure and public wealth of this country has to be redistributed into few hands via warfare, via profit on sickness and death, via these lending money into the stock market so that every bubble is always supported and nobody ever has to take a haircut on their wealth, as so long as you're above a certain line on the tax returns. It's just, it makes me sick.
I don't know. I think we're seeing a Redditor revolt, though. I think some interesting stuff is still happening in the stock market, and I think they're learning that when a whole bunch of people get together, they can have a lot of power. So who knows?
Well, Orwell also said the power is always in the proles if they ever learn how to use it.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
But H.G. Wells once said, if we don't end the war will end us. And I think he was onto something in terms of defense spending. That's where it all starts. I think that it trickles down from there. Do we need to be spending, I think, something like 30 to 33% of the world's defense spending comes from the United States?
And that's not even efficient. All those contracts are getting padded because they're favors to friends. Like, of course. I don't think we have any control over.
Not even getting padded. We're actually building weapon systems that have been obsolete for decades, and we're continuing to build them. And it's so funny because you have Republicans going up before Congress, and they start talking about, if you close this contract, this plant in Alabama that's the lifeblood of this town is going to shut down. There's going to be no job. It's like, wait a minute. Aren't you the same guy that was just up here talking about the government shouldn't be picking winners and losers? That sounds like a socialized economy when you're saying the government should only have this factory open and have this contract for this private company to make all this money so that you can keep jobs. That doesn't make sense.
Well, tax dollars to save jobs.
I'm in favor of it, but it's not Adam Smith.
This horse and buggy factory's been open for 100 years. We can't let it close.
Can't start making these bayonets.
If we're going to have public pressure for jobs, again, look at Raytheon. So I don't want it to go to a place where the CEO makes $20 million and the average worker makes $37,000 on their assembly lines, and most of the money is going to lobbying that same government into spending all that money. I'd rather you have a jobs program. I don't care if it's picking up cans on the side of the road, or when it comes down to, at the end of the day, pay people to dig a ditch and pay another shift to come in and fill it before you support it by spending money in which the vast majority of that is not going into the actual jobs and people being employed. It's going into to a few fingers, and there's some ancillary benefits that there's a few hundred jobs in each one created as well.
And then it's flowing into lobbyists, which flows into the government, which flows right back to the defense contractors. We're just in this circle where we're peeling money off.
And then we wonder, and we say, well, why is it that every 10 years we hear some newly staggering figure on how much of the total wealth is controlled by how small of a percentage, and more importantly, it's how much the worst stats on that is when you look at how much new wealth. So when you look at the new wealth created just since the 2009 to 2013 crash and recession, the Great Recession that followed in those years, almost every bit of new wealth created since has gone to less than 10% of people. I mean, that's obscene.
Yeah.
And but the worst part is it's baked in. It's designed to be that way. And I think as long as we're a country that profits off of killing poor people across the world that nobody cares about, or at least nobody over here cares about, and profiting off the sickness of our own most destitute people, I don't know that there's a big future for a country like that.
But what do you do when people can invest in these companies publicly? Retail traders, investment firms, hedge funds, they can all make money off of it. And we have so glorified the accumulation of wealth. How do you make it illegal? Is there legislation?
Well, no, you don't have to do that. If you just change fiscal policy, you wouldn't make that much money off of it.
Right. Yeah. You have to make it a bad bet.
Right.
Part of the stock market is not even investing anymore. It's futures and all of these different
that add no value to
mechanisms that you are really just gambling. It's not investing. It's not,
and you're
benefiting.
You're not gambling in the sense that you're like putting money into a slot machine. It's like the dealer, and then you're gambling. Right.
Well, and I think we talked about this before. And some people can manipulate through their contacts with the media, their relationship with the media. They can actually make a bet and then manipulate the outcome because they're so powerful.
Yeah, that's actually the CIA calling. Sorry, everybody.
Ridiculous.
They're on to us.
Shut it down. I don't know what you guys are doing here. I was having coffee. They walked in and there was a microphone. All right. On that note, the future sucks. So let's all agree on that. And on that note, let's move on to our weekly segment of... Did I get it right this time? Brendan's bad take of the week.
So we're going to shift gears back to the impeachment trial of Donald J. Trump 2.0. And this week's bad take of the week is more of a bad defense of the week. This comes from Trump's lead counsel, his lead prosecutor, as he called himself early in the impeachment trial, Bruce Castor. Now, remember, Trump's whole entire legal team quit about a week before the impeachment. So this guy has not been on the job for very long. I think his performance on day one of the impeachment showed that pretty clearly. So he's only been working for Trump for a short time. He even said after he watched the House impeachment managers, wow, you guys were so good that we had to change our strategy. He just went ahead and said that right away, which was awesome. But he had a couple of really sensationally bad takes as a defense attorney for the president, the ex-president. And so I've picked a couple because there are a couple of quotes here that just defy all logic. And really, you heard that Donald Trump down in Mar-a-Lago was pulling his hair out and he was ranting and raving. And these are probably the quotes that did that to him. So I'll start. There's two that I'm going to share. Mr. Castor at one point said, "The reason I'm having trouble with their argument," meaning the Democrats, "is that the American people just spoke and they just changed administrations. The people are smart enough, in the light most favorable to them. They're smart enough to pick a new administration if they don't like the old one, and they just did." Whoops. So you have Trump's main attorney in his impeachment trial just totally miss the memo that the big lie is still front and center, that Trump won the election by a landslide.
And that people like him.
And that everyone voted for him. And meanwhile, his lawyer says, hey, everyone chose Biden and Trump's out of office, so what's the big deal here anymore? Whoops, that was mistake number one. This one probably got Trump extra hot. Later in his opening statement, he said, which, by the way, was one of the worst, most meandering. It got to the point that even Alan Dershowitz was like, I don't know what he's doing. I mean, Republican lawyers were saying he has no plan. This is just awful. So later, Mr. Castor says, if my colleagues on this side of the chamber actually think that the President Trump committed a criminal offense after he's out of office, you go and arrest him. The Department of Justice does know what to do with such people.
I'm sorry, we'll be right back.
It's like, okay, well, let's wrap this up. Let's get Merrick Garland seated, and we'll let the Department of Justice take over. So not only did he blow up Trump's lie about the election being stolen, but then he also basically gave the green light to the Department of Justice to pursue criminal charges instead of simply impeachment charges. So really nice work, Bruce Castor.
Well, this is the problem with everybody who's tried to defend Trump, is that if a serious lawyer comes in, they understand quickly we need to make a procedural argument. That's the only thing we have. So that's what they all wanted to do off the team that left.
Yeah.
And Trump says, no, we have to do the election was stolen. And
Push the big lie.
Yeah, they cringe and are like, I know, but we can't do that. That's why we didn't argue that in any of the court cases after the election. We were all arguing procedure.
We don't want to get sued by Dominion.
Right?
Yeah. Or Smartmatic. We don't want to be sued in the billions by these people that you're defaming.
So you have this difficulty because you have the Mad King who's like, no, I want you to say good things about me and say all these different lies. And everybody who's a real lawyer is like, yeah, I want to have a career after this, be taken seriously. But what we didn't get into was Castor.
Because we know we're not getting paid.
Yeah, right? Yeah, none of them are going to get paid. Castor especially is not going to get paid.
Hey, Castor shouldn't because, all right, I'm from Pennsylvania
His
and I
check's
remember
been
him. He was
canceled.
Montgomery County DA, I believe. He's the guy who didn't prosecute Bill Cosby. So he was the DA who looked at all the evidence and said, there's great footage of that on YouTube of him like trying to explain afterward when Cosby got convicted over why he didn't talk to a lot of the victims, how all these women came forward and said, hey, actually, we have stories that will reinforce that. And he's like, no, just not enough evidence here. Yeah, but you haven't even heard our story. Yep, nothing to see here. Yikes. So he declined that. He lost his reelection bid, and then the next guy, of course, put Cosby in jail in 2018. But so not a top flight lawyer, but that's where we've got.
Well, you get what you pay for. I think that's the lesson here for Trump. And oh, by the way, some news broke today that Trump will be adding to his legal team this week. You think after Castor sort of melted down?
Who's he adding? My cousin Vinny?
I don't know. Judge Judy,
if you can't even get Dershowitz on. Oh, by the way, this kind of slipped under the radar. I don't know if you guys saw it, but Alan Dershowitz nominated Jared Kushner for a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
What?
Which means
got that nose way up his ass.
Oh my God.
Yeah, which means that the criteria to nominate someone for a Peace Prize is lower than I thought.
And yet even Trump hasn't been nominated. So.
Oh, he did get nominated, actually, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, he got nominated. By, I believe, was it Bolton? Was someone?
Yes, it was Josh Bolton.
I thought he nominated himself. I thought that was
John
a
Bolton.
joke. Okay, somebody did.
I think Bolton did before they had their falling out, but somebody did. And it was a big deal because he was so upset that Obama got it. And listen, I don't think Obama, it's pretty hard to be like the drone guy and get the Nobel Peace Prize.
And get 2 Peace Prizes. Right? Yeah.
So, look, that the award is really a joke. I think we would probably agree it's a neoliberal Western, pat each other on the back.
Wait,
type
I
thing.
thought Greta Thunberg just got it. Did she get one?
Is she the Peace Prize? I think she got a Nobel Prize, but I don't think it was for peace.
Okay.
I think it was actually Hunter Biden's organization, his world. Does he have like World Hunger Organization or something? Like,
I have no idea.
He's the executive director of. Like, in a way, Hunter Biden kind of won a Peace Prize this year, so that was extra.
Oh,
that was an extra tasty decision, I'm sure, for Trump.
So back on the impeachment, a lot of theater this week. It's about. I thought again that I really thought that the prosecution presented an amazing case.
And what somebody said, I don't know who said it, but it was one of the attorneys, was like, it looks like you hired a professional movie maker to put together these very dramatic videos. Like, of course they did it professionally. They're professionals.
Goddamn impeachment
and of course
trial.
they're going to pick the worst, the most damning ones because they're trying to do their job.
How dare you put effort into this? You see what we're doing over here? We're firing our defense team a week before the trial.
I saw a good meme this week where it said, this may be the first time in history where a trial is taking place at the scene of the crime with both victims and abettors acting as the jury.
So,
and it's very true, right?
Yeah, it is.
Leahy, they said he's a witness, a juror, and, a judge.
He's presiding over the whole entire case. Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. I did not know he's the longest serving senator.
I did not know that until it came up either.
There you go. He's 80 years old. Good old Leahy. He's just plugging away.
Every time I count Mitch McConnell's chins, I just assume that anyone that old and decrepit has had to be. And I've never, ever heard of him doing any work outside of it. So,
well, one thing that I heard yesterday when I was watching the impeachment, because they did the whole timeline, obviously, which was super fascinating. Mm-hmm. And they had like little dots on this layout of the Capitol building to show like video of what was happening and then where it was happening. So that was all really cool. But one thing that happened was Trump made a tweet about Pence, basically saying like, you're a horrible person and you're doing the wrong thing. he made that immediately after someone told him that Pence had just been evacuated for safety. So he basically was like urging people to go find Pence and make him not be in safety. So I was like, that's pretty damning
And some
evidence
of the
right there
video.
that he
Yeah.
sent that tweet though, like when he knew Pence was in danger, like right then at that moment in danger. I was like, that's pretty harsh. Like I would
Definitely.
love to be a fly on the wall in Pence's house. Just what is he saying about all of this?
I'm
This
not
is-
happy, mother.
I mean, it's crazy.
Pass
Like
me another glass of milk.
someone was trying to get you lynched basically.
Yeah, and I think I heard a source say that Pence said something along the lines of, after everything I've done for him, this is how he repays me.
Doesn't anybody get that though? Like,
After,
duh.
yeah, after all this time, yes, that's exactly what happens. So show me one ally he hasn't thrown
Right.
under the bus the second it has become advantageous for
As
Trump
soon
to
as
do so.
it's politically expedient, boom, you're gone. There's nothing but complete fealty at all times. And as soon as you depart from that, you're gone.
Which is sort of frustrating and fascinating to me right now, because we have that fealty still remaining, even though he's out of office. I think that they're scared he's still a kingmaker, that he still has tremendous
Well, he is.
move. Yeah, they clearly. Otherwise, I don't think that they would hesitate to convict him at this point. I think it's obvious. I think one of the most damning tweets, I think, came from, I want to say it was McCarthy. It was a prominent Republican who said, this has gone too far. Trump needs to call them off. Like
Yes,
the
yes.
stark admission that Trump did more or less control and
Yes.
inspire and sway these people came not from the Democrats, but from the Republican leadership themselves, saying they're urging him to quote unquote call it off. So if you're not scared of him, you vote to convict, right? It's
But
easy.
that was when he had a Twitter account. What has
Yeah,
he
and he
got?
doesn't
What
have
has he
anymore.
got now?
He has a
Doesn't.
high approval rating, and it's still
Yeah.
working. It's still working. And there's a very good reason for Republicans to fear him. He is.
I don't know. That just blows my goddamn mind. It blows my fucking mind.
Because what have been the major consequences from moving away from him? Does Romney have some kind of like former candidate charm or aura that has like Romney really, he voted to convict in the first impeachment trial. He's voted that this impeachment is constitutional. He's likely going to vote to convict again. And he hasn't, he's felt the wrath of Trump's
he's
outrage, but what has he lost?
But
What
he's
has
from
Romney?
Massachusetts, and that's
Yeah.
more of a.
But he's a senator in Utah.
Yeah, I guess.
So I don't know. I'm looking at the people who've gone against him as senators, who will be senators for at least 2, 4, 6 more years. And at that point, are you really in such danger? If you're Mitch McConnell, you're not going to run for Senate again in 6 years. You'll be 100 years old. What does he have to lose at this point? He's safe.
Somebody said that Trump will release the tapes.
Trump will sell the secrets. I mean, that really
I
has
don't
to be it.
know. It doesn't make any sense to me.
I think the ultimate reward here is holding the party together so that they can win the presidency again. You've already got Republican senators who are going to be retiring at the end of this term because they have said, I don't know that we can stitch a coalition together. But these other senators are hoping, I think, that they're going to be able to hold on to the 10 to 20% of the crazies in an effort to stitch together a winning presidential campaign. And then that's when they're going to get their power and their positions back, so that holding on to Trump is not necessarily just to skirt away from his outrage, but it's also this desperate clinging to the idea that they need Trump's diehards in order to get anything done as a party.
I wish like the year 2000 Republicans could see the year 2020 Republicans.
Well, I mean,
and
they
I'd like to
can.
see their reactions.
All you have to do is look at the Lincoln Project
there they are.
commercials. But don't look too hard, because one of the Lincoln Project guys just got
right.
in trouble for being a bad boy.
What
Yeah.
did he do?
Well, he
Oh,
just
well.
likes young boys, apparently.
no. He
And
was
I don't know what it
offering,
is about conservative Republicans and young boys.
Family values.
Yeah, they had to run from him quick. They
Yeah.
said he was a founder, but we absolutely don't associate with him anymore at all.
You know, I heard that the Lincoln Project didn't really sway.
No, in
many
fact, all the
people.
data shows that it actually had a the opposite effect that actually
charged up Republicans.
It made
Yeah.
Republicans feel like they were still normal.
But-
well, the other part was they were also raising a ton of money, and about 90% of it was going to overhead.
Overhead, quote
Yeah.
unquote. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. We have to make money now that we've been frozen out of GOP gravy train because we're not on the Trump board.
I mean, if they got anything done, is that they temporarily distracted Trump and his campaign at times because Trump really couldn't contain himself. He had to respond. And they knew that. They were playing ads in D.C. Like, who are they playing those ads for? Like, D.C. is going to be 90% Democratic vote. But there was a party of one. And it did work in that regard. But how many votes did they change? How many, like, middle of, moderates did they win over? I don't know. I think those moderates probably would have voted for Biden anyway, our moderate Republican friends who crossed the aisle. I don't think it was the Lincoln Project and their vicious advertisements that did it.
All right. Speaking of ads, I wanted to mention something. Facebook is now going to be reducing the amount of political content that people see. Now they're going to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Now in
Good.
2021.
It's kind of like Biden's Saudi Arabia.
But here's the
Call the fire department after the house burns down.
the problem I have with it, of course, is because they're deciding
Yes.
what content. So they're going to do it in other countries first, like Brazil. I think they gotta warm us up to it. But it's just like AI, like a human being with biases and motivations programs AI. And so humans with biases and motivations are going to program whatever this new algorithm is to show political content. So I don't know what it's going to end up being, but they say they're okay if it affects their bottom line. But
Now, is this that they're saying that they're only going to limit political paid advertisements or political content?
I think it's gonna be the algorithm.
They're going to make it so you see less political content.
Period.
Period. That people
Yikes.
like comments that they make or whatever. Like you could still be in like a group and do stuff like that, but it would be more stuff that you would just
Here's
see.
my concern with that,
Yeah.
because YouTube is doing similar adjustments to their algorithm, and they're basing it on what they call the most trusted news sources. And what you're going to end up seeing here, in my opinion, is a deepening between the relationship between mainstream media and the mainstream tech companies. And I think what their solution is going to be, let's get a whole lot of money from the New York Times, Fox News, MSNBC, all the places that we could say these are verified sources, and then let's keep quiet the dissident chatter that sometimes is the best news. So I don't like one of the great things that I think has come from YouTube and the internet in general, all the conspiracy theory nonsense notwithstanding, is the idea that there's been a platform to challenge the mainstream chokehold on information.
I think what YouTube wants to do is make it so you don't go down a conspiracy theory rabbit hole by looking at one thing, because that's what YouTube does. You look at one thing and they suggest something that's just like it. But
that I'm totally in favor with changing the algorithm that way. But when they're talking about promoting more of the stuff from trusted news sources,
You're just going to drive people to the alternative news sources that have already provided this platform for people to it's like a news buffet. You don't have to eat the things that are good for you. You only have to eat the things that you like. And people are already seeking outside sources because they don't like being told that the bad news that's bad for them comes from quote unquote trusted sources. So if you continue to elevate these platforms like, New York Times and Washington Post and say, these are our trusted platforms, you're going to lower people's interest in those and increase their interest in finding news that makes them feel good.
Yeah, I don't think that's what Facebook's trying to do. I think they're trying to avoid, because people, and I've heard a million people say this, I don't go on Facebook anymore because it's just politics.
It's too political.
I think they're trying to make it so it's not just like people yelling at each other anymore. I don't know how they're going to do that. Maybe you won't see comments. Like if someone makes a comment on an article or something, that won't instantly pop up for you if they're a friend of yours, right? Something, their cat video will pop up instead, so you won't just be incensed by something that's popping up in your feed.
Well, I was
not necessarily a news article.
Yeah, I was encouraged that when Twitter decided to eliminate all political advertising before the 2020 election.
So did Facebook.
And reluctantly over time they did.
But I know for the newspaper, even our sponsored posts couldn't be done. We couldn't boost posts or anything like that.
They had some
for about a month. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Which we were okay with it because it was for a good intention, but it really did hurt our business model in that we couldn't promote, because if you do have a business page, Facebook seems to make really good and sure nobody sees it.
Yes.
Like it never comes up in the feed unless it's boosted, right?
Oh yeah.
It's like, oh, you've had 36 engagements on this article, and you've got tens of thousands of followers. How did that happen?
Yeah, but if you put $50 into it,
yeah,
voila,
we can get you
5,000.
Yeah.
I'm
For the next
familiar.
24 hours.
But
Right?
to return to the point, Twitter didn't really suffer. It was a bit of a tiny backlash at first, and then they have done absolutely fine since then on revenue and also their stock price. Like they didn't really pay much of a price for getting rid of political advertising at the absolute apex of the time when political advertising would have made them millions. So that's encouraging. That's encouraging that these platforms don't need politics to survive. But where else are people going to go? The group stuff is actually what makes me most nervous. That's where the conspiracy theories spread the fastest is the like little bubbles.
But that's
and
another
echo
part of the
chambers.
thing. They're policing the groups.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to make
much-
sure no one's planning to overthrow the government again. But
Sure.
other than that, you
In
can
fact,
just
from what I
be
understand, they
crazy
closed
in there.
down a lot of groups recently because I heard some people complaining about it.
Yeah, well, that's how Q spread was the use of these groups would explode overnight. 30,
And
40,000 people.
I'm fine if crazies want to flock together as long as they're not plotting something diabolical,
Right,
you know?
Yeah.
If the word bomb comes up too many times, then yeah, maybe, give it a look.
Let's just let them argue about chemtrails. Weren't those the days?
I know, right? I long for the days when I'm just talking to a couple of friends about their interest in chemtrails.
And the frogs turning gay. That was a gentler time.
All right, let's move on to a couple of news stories here. Probably a close runner-up for Brendan's bad take of the week should have been Sarah Palin. If anybody saw her interview with Piers Morgan,
tell me.
It became very clear that somebody tweeted a little while back. I remember seeing, "Don't you long for the days when Sarah Palin was considered the craziest part of the Republican Party?" But she made a very, very strong case that she's still every bit as batshit crazy as Marjorie Taylor Greene and the rest of them. In a meandering, if you want to talk about meandering, that opening statement might not have had anything on her interview where, just mostly garden variety Sarah Palin type nuggets, but very obstinate and refused to acknowledge again that President Trump lost the election.
Wow.
They tried to pin her down on that one, but it wasn't happening. Another great story, Florida man one. I don't know if you guys heard this, but it's wonderful. Apparently, a Florida man stole his girlfriend's engagement ring that he had given her because she kept it, and he stole
his
it from her.
ex-girlfriend?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ex-fiance. Well, no, I guess ex-fiance because she had
Okay.
possession of it, and then used it to propose to his new girlfriend, who now sheriff deputies in Volusia County are looking for to try to get this stolen ring back. So
Classy.
yeah, so if you can
Can't
think
use
of
the same ring even if you don't steal it.
That's tacky, but yeah.
Wait, why didn't she just give it back though?
Right.
That's my
Why didn't
question.
she give it back? And does
they
it
never
really-
give it back.
They don't
It's a gift.
keep the flat
Oh
screen.
yeah. I don't have
But
to get
it-
back
it-
the
it
sweater
was a-
you gave me, and you keep the $6,000 ring.
It was
Come
a
on.
gift with conditions.
Yes,
though,
I agree with you
so
100%.
It should be given back.
I've never gotten one back.
How many have you given to? I want to ask.
More than I should have. My own fault. Touche. So yes,
You don't turn into a punk rocker if you don't have a few broken engagements.
this is true. A lot of times it was moissanites. So from a purely ethical standard,
Yeah.
purely ethical, it's more reflective.
No
It's just
blood
as
diamonds in
rare.
here.
No blood diamonds. It does happen to cost less. Come on.
Sometimes they're better looking.
They are actually.
Right? It's
with
just
you.
women's vanity that
So why
makes
didn't it
them
work
require,
out? Is the
yeah.
question.
That had nothing to do with the rock. The
Not
moissanite
because,
was
it's not because our engagement was started with a lie.
the moissanite was beyond reproach. I never said it was a diamond. She inferred it was a diamond. It was her own fault. Pretty presumptuous. Talk about princess culture.
No.
All right, let's move on to
dear.
immigration. Get me out of this.
Good segue.
Brandon, take over.
Immigration. What's going on with immigration? Joe Biden's doing a lot. Listen, he started off by saying we're going to have to undo a lot of what the Trump administration did. And fortunately, we can do that through executive action, executive orders right away. Just recently, I think today, he removed the emergency declaration on that allowed that allowed Trump to use defense funds to build the border wall. So the border wall is officially 100% defunded now. Biden also went to the Supreme Court and said, hey, that, the case that we have about being able to use the emergency funds, let's just withdraw that. Supreme Court said, yep, no problem. So again, border wall has absolutely no funding now. That's good. That's a simple thing you can do. However, when it comes to real immigration reform, I don't really understand what the strategy is here. Okay. Early on, he immediately introduced an immigration bill into Congress. It's not bipartisan at all. It has no chance. It'll pass in the House, and it has zero chance of getting 60 votes in the Senate. So I have to ask myself, is Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin going to blow up the filibuster for this hugely one-sided immigration bill? Probably not. So I don't understand what the strategy is there other than to move the ball. What do you think?
Well, they're going to have to do something because there is a Supreme Court case right now that some states are bringing, one of which is Texas, to pretty much declare DACA unconstitutional.
Yeah.
So if that happens, they're going to have to do something real quick because it's going to leave hundreds of thousands of people with no legal status and take away their worker rights.
And I think the problem that Joe Biden is going to run into really quickly is that this is not just a legislative issue. It's also a judicial issue. He has two prongs to fight through, the courts and Congress. And I don't know how he's going to get through either in a lot of these major issues.
Well, DACA is actually a very bipartisan issue.
Sure.
I think a lot of conservatives agree that these kids didn't come here on their own, and they deserve
and they're paying
to be
taxes
supported.
and they all have jobs.
And they're creating jobs in many cases. So if they could do something about that separately from some larger immigration policy, that would be helpful.
Well, and that there begins the fight. So I don't know I don't know what's accomplished by introducing the legislation so early with absolutely no input from Republicans, because that's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
The things that he can do are let's start focusing again on, this is a slippery slope, the problems in the countries that are causing folks to leave their oppressive conditions and come to the United States. So the first thing I think you do in that regard is you end the stay in Mexico policy. So for those who don't know what that is, essentially the stay in Mexico policy that Trump put in was, if you are a non-Mexican immigrant looking to cross through Mexico and use asylum in the United States, he said, stay in Mexico.
Well, Mexico's not very happy about that.
While we sort this out for you. And of course, there's not enough immigration judges, and there's a huge backlog, and there's this asylum system is totally effed right now. So these people who are coming from other countries are just sometimes living in horrible conditions at the border in these camps because they clearly don't have a place to go in Mexico, and they can't file for asylum in the United States. And that's creating humanitarian issues in Mexico. So you're right. Mexico's not happy about that.
What do you think conservatives would think about helping the countries where the people come from so that they wouldn't want to come here?
Well, I mean, conservatives did try to help at one point. I mean, Reagan, during the Civil War in El Salvador.
Reagan was very pro-immigration, though. That was
true.
a very different time in the Republican Party.
But I think
so was Bush.
But the mistakes,
they love that cheap labor.
Well,
I think they still do. They again, a lot of times it's do what I do, don't do what I say.
Well, listen, I've said this for years. The immigration issue is one of those things that never gets solved because neither side really wants to solve it. They want to have, and that's why they go to these extreme polemic positions and they say, this is our line in the sand, this is our line in the sand. Right. They're a million miles apart. And everybody says, well, if you don't have this, you don't have this, they're all deal breakers. And then it gives them something to raise money and to bring populist angst up against. Now, what you're saying, Brendan, about those other countries is so important. And that's another issue I brought up when this sort of nativist populist strain of the Republican Party rang through Trump, is if you don't act as a good actor in these parts of the world, they're going to end up in your place. So
they're going to knock on your door, right?
And we have to look at the historic American role. And if you go to, if we're looking at South America, let's be honest too, even though there have been more people caught on the terrorist watch list trying to come through Canada than through Mexico, we were building the wall where brown people live. So there's absolutely a racial element to this. But if we want to look at South America in particular, most of it goes back to the 50s and 40s and U.S. fruit. And U.S. Fruit was a huge conglomerate that just basically went into these places and had their way with the local economies and local infrastructure. The Eisenhower administration basically made the decision to prop them up. We overthrew a duly elected president in Guatemala.
Yep.
They've descended into a 36-year civil war that they've never recovered from economically or in terms of social justice. And they've had tremendous instability. It's one of the worst places in the world that there'd be to live. So when you look at our fingerprints on a lot of these problems to start with, and then say our interest in saying, hey, yeah, you're right. Listen, if I've got a son, and if he was 11 years old and my options were really, he's going to end up in a gang and have to murder somebody before he's 13 and probably be dead before he's 20, or I got to break the law to get him into another place that I just wasn't lucky enough to be born in myself or bear him in. Of course I'm going to do that. And I would absolutely not begrudge anybody who did. Now, that said, do we have to have an immigration policy that's functional? Yes, and we don't.
And
we have to be a nation.
We haven't made any real immigration. No immigration bill has passed in 30 years?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we all agree that, all right, we have somewhere around 12 or 13 million undocumented immigrants. We don't know. We know that number's really reduced because of the economic downturn following the Great Recession, and then Trump's election, and people saying, hey, there's not as many opportunities there, and we could work somewhere else.
And more racism.
Yes. But the other part, too, is when you look at the population statistics, we need immigrants. We need them to shore up things like Social Security.
This lawsuit that's being brought by these states to overturn DACA, basically, those states are going to lose money if that happens.
And again, to return to your question, do Republicans want to invest in these other countries?
Well, because
in order
the
to slow down?
Republican trope is like, we got to help America before we help other countries.
Right. But you could spend hundreds of billions of dollars policing your immigration, or you could spend less aiding these countries that they're coming from to help. But then, of course, you're sweeping in as an American savior, and that brings its own issues along as well, is that you can't just come in and say, we're taking over, because, like you said, Mitch, there was a lot of that in the past that has now led to disasters and terrible conditions, which are driving people to the United States because they are in miserable conditions. So can we do anything to help those folks who are in miserable conditions and do it in such a way that we could sell it to Republicans as a positive thing on net immigration? It seems like we should be able to, but I don't know. I think that not only does immigration raise money, it sells on the news channels. I mean, the migrants is like a never-ending, these migrant caravans is a never-ending story on Fox News. It will drive eyeballs and therefore commercial dollars as well. So we are fighting against the trope that we need to help ourselves before we help other countries. Well, we are helping ourselves by helping other countries. That messaging needs to come forward.
What I love is when they're like, it's always, why don't we help the veterans? I'm like, why don't we? We could have for the past 20 years. Why aren't we helping the veterans? Would you like to help one right now?
Yeah, unrelated, but yeah, good question. Like, very nice thought.
We can do two things at once.
Yes.
Yes. Look, there's another side of this too, where we look at one of the things that the Democrats have been guilty of, in my opinion, is abusing the H-1B visas and saying, hey, well, we're going to do more to get people that can contribute to our economy and bring certain skills. And the more I looked into this, I was actually approached by a trade organization for American engineers who educated me on how much that's abused in terms of, hey, I went to school and got my master's in electrical engineering, and it's very, very expensive to do that. The reward is supposed to be that you make a good living. However, you can bring somebody from India who's thrilled to make $40,000 a year with their master's degree in that. And countries are doing that left and right in order to cheapen the labor, not to add skills. And they always go to the government. You're supposed to make the claim, I can't hire American workers for this.
Right.
And on the high-end H-1Bs, Apple and a lot of your big tech companies are guilty of this. They want, and I remember Steve Jobs lobbying President Obama for that and saying, we just don't have enough of them here. No, we don't have enough of them here that will work as cheaply as you'd like them to work. That's more of a problem to me than the guy coming in picking strawberries. Vice News did some great reporting on all of these industries that were hurt by the Trump policies, the shrimping industry, the fruit picking industry, shrimping, for example, they showed these boats in California where these people would go out, and there's a rule that if somebody quits at sea, you have to bring them back immediately, right? Now, you might be 3 days out.
Oh, no.
And that might make your whole 2 months unprofitable if you bring somebody in. So quitting is not really that great. And when they were hiring American workers, they were finding, one, the work sucks.
Yeah.
Okay. You have to be able to twist these, because if you don't twist their heads off and get rid of them at sea, it makes the cost of the shrimp so much higher and less profitable because of the weight is not counted in the same way and all that. So you have to be able to do this incredibly fast. And there are cultures of countries in shrimping countries where people do this in an artisan way. They take pride in their ability to do it with extreme efficiency. And yes, let's be honest that the American dream and the American economy has always been built on immigration. It has always been a function of people from a worse place come here and do the bottom level, entry level work, and that largely Americans don't want to do. And they are happy to do it because that existence is so much better than what's available to them in their country. And it's sad to say, but when you look and you see how many people are willing to come from south of the United States, anywhere in the world, and live 7, 8, 9 people in a small 1,300 square foot house, just because they look at it and say, hey, I can make $11 an hour maybe here, right? And there's a Walmart, and I can get cheap food. Mm-hmm. I can pay cheap rent, splitting it up this way. I don't care. I'm sleeping in a sleeping bag and on a floor somewhere, and I can still send enough money home to support an entire extended family in that country. That says a lot about where they're coming from and what that opportunity is.
In many ways, I see a lot of people who come to this country as immigrants really taking advantage of the American dream and like making a lot more of it, you know?
Yes.
And a lot of people who are here and maybe take it for granted a little bit.
Now, and not only do we get that low end labor, but you look at the tech world, for example, it is, besotted with immigrants who've come with great skills and tremendous value added to the economy. And that's been the other side of the American dream. Immigrants are something like, I think they're 2.5 times as likely as a native-born person to start their own business.
I was going to say a lot of businesses.
Much more entrepreneurial.
Yeah, absolutely.
There have been. I remember reading a profile about a town in Ohio that was hollowed out part of the Rust Belt. A lot like the part of Appalachia that I grew up in, where there's towns where I grew up in where you can literally go and buy a home today, a functional home for $5,000-$6,000. Now, there's no economic opportunity around that. They're mostly towns that are exclusively inhabited by people on Social Security income and different forms of retirement pensions, and they're slowly dying off. But there was this profile in this town of people who came in from Turkey and just saw this as, oh my God, this is so so much opportunity here. And it rescued that town. There's another town near where I grew up that was completely rescued by Mexican population of produce pickers, and started their own economy in a place that was dying off. So it's always been part of the American story, and so has pitting the poorest different people against each other. That part hasn't changed, and it's mostly because it's an easy way of saying, if you're looking at someone next to you as the threat, you're never going to look up and see whose boot is really on your neck.
Sure,
right.
absolutely.
And one thing that is different now, unfortunately, is that I think ICE is at its cruelest version, possibly ever, at least in the last few years. And they're a completely rogue organization. Biden can't just unilaterally bring them to heel. He can't change the way that they enforce things. It's sort of this
systemic culture problem.
Yeah, and it's an organization that is going to fight against. We're talking about moving change through the courts. That's where he's going to run into issue. ICE is already fighting him on the changes that he tried to make about the 100 days deportation in Texas. They said, no, that's unconstitutional. It's not going to let us do our jobs. And, Biden already ran into sort of a loss at the courts in his first week. And that just shows you right away that you've got this arm of the anti-immigration side of our country that's actually enforcing it that can't even really be controlled by the president.
Well, now they're like their own lobby. They're their own lobbying group. They're trying to protect their jobs, right?
And I don't have, listen, I don't have any problem. I guess the more conservative part of me on this issue, I don't have any problem. Like, for example, there have been some on the left who've decried the degree to which how quickly we will deport immigrants when they commit crimes. I don't have any problem by saying we should hold a very high, there's a tremendous amount of demand to get in the United States. I don't have any problem with saying we should have a very high threshold in terms of what we look for to grant you working papers, a green card, or citizenship, and saying that there should be a long probationary period, and that yes, you can be held to a higher standard than someone who is fortunate enough to have been born into citizenship here if you're brought over here in a work program and you do something wrong. Other countries do that. I don't think there's a sound argument to be made against that.
No, I don't disagree with that.
And that's where I think 80% of American population would be on most of those things together.
I think it's where the line is drawn that probably some people disagree. Like, what's the thing that you do that makes it so you're deported? You know?
Violent crime, I think, is the easy threshold.
Yeah.
Even on a low level violent crime.
So Trump was, they were getting rid of people who hadn't committed violent crimes.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
who were, very settled here with their families and
But
children.
some of the people on the other side of the issue were pushing for what I would call far too liberal standards in terms of saying, well, they should just be held the same standard as every American. Look.
Well, that means they would have to be sent to our prison, and then we would have to pay for that. And I'm just saying, if they're going to go to prison, they might as well
saying that they shouldn't
go
be
somewhere else.
Right. And saying that it shouldn't just be deportation. But the idea, I think, I have this conversation with my son all the time. We have to have the self-awareness of, we won a lottery. I mean, when you look at the idea of how lucky you are to have been born into a first world country, to have been born into a place where, even as messed up as it can be and as disparate as the economic situations can be, there are a few places in the world where a poor person has it anywhere near as good as a poor person has it here, which is why so many of the poorest people in the world will go risk literally life and limb to try to get an opportunity to cobble out the most modest existence in our culture. There are people that are willing to die
because it so far exceeds what their existence could be in in the country that they were born in. But this is different than seeking asylum. There are people who are looking for better lives, who are willing to work for it and are willing to do the low-level jobs, a lot of the farming jobs, and yet those folks are different than having a process by which people can apply for asylum in a country and be protected because their country is so full of corruption and danger that their lives are at risk. That's and that part of our immigration, I wish we could separate that from the folks that are saying, hey, I'd like to come work there, versus the people who are saying, I'm running for my life. And it's all gotten conflated right now. And there's no movement on anything right now because we're looking at immigration as this big Stonewall issue, which is...
And the system itself is broken. There is no means, and that's another part where I do have empathy for people that say, hey, look, I did it the right way. I waited 6 years. I went through hell to get my actual papers and do everything right. I don't think somebody should jump the line. I get that too, but at the same time, that 6-year part doesn't work. Not only does it not work for certain situations, but it also doesn't work for us because when you look at how much of an important part of our economic engine immigrants are and have been, that is completely dysfunctional. And the people that's where that sort of Republican mantra from Bush and previous was, hey, it's cheap labor is kind of good, but the reality is our economy was built with that sort of baked in over the last 30 or 40 years. And there is no easy way to extract that. And if anybody thinks, oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of Americans lined up to do that job, they're not. Because look, those people are out on the corner, getting into a whole other issue here, but I see increasingly, and this has become a pet peeve of mine, able-bodied men, white men my age, who literally could not have more going for them in terms of opportunity in this economy, in this country, compared to the people that we're talking about. And I consistently see them panhandling while I see other people from those other countries doing some of the most difficult jobs that they can't find enough of our people willing to do.
There's an interesting pride issue in Americans with that kind of work.
Yeah.
Right? That they won't do that kind of work under any circumstances. You'll go right to panhandling instead. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Without question. There's when you look at stuff like, it blows my mind sometimes.
There's other issues, at work here though, like the drug issue, and I don't think it's necessarily because they don't want to work. Maybe they can't function in a work environment. I don't know, but I hear what you're saying.
Look,
this
I don't think they're like, I don't want to work at Walmart, so I'm going to stand on the corner.
I'm just going to stand in the corner, or I don't.
Let's pivot a little bit to immigration, because this has been something that I've struggled with. Pivot from immigration. That's something I've struggled with because I've written extensively on homelessness, and one of the problems I think we do as an issue is that we tend to, again, look at it through this monolithic lens, kind of like immigration. We say, how do we solve homelessness? And homelessness is really a symptom in most cases in terms of other things are happening. And from my research, what I was able to show was that about 85% of it is unmedicated mental illness and drug and alcohol addiction. So when you take that big giant swath of it and put it over here, and there's crossover in that demographic as well, obviously, but when you take that and if you want to hang that on something, you go back to the 80s when we got rid of funding state mental health hospitals, when we switched to block grants in the 70s under Nixon, and then it was continued through the Reagan administration, and basically said, hey, you're going to have a lot less money, but we're going to give it to you one big lump sum. Spend it however you want. Everybody said, well, I guess we're going to have to look at outpatient for this. Well, that doesn't work well when you're bipolar, just saying, well, hey, just come in every Tuesday.
Right.
And that's the biggest, when it comes to mental health, the biggest thing we deal with homelessness is bipolar, because that's one of the rare physical health conditions where you have a disease, and the worse it gets, the less likely you are to seek or accept treatment. Where the opposite happens. If you have cancer, you're begging somebody to help you. Right. If you have anything where it's an ailment, you're running into emergency room begging for help. Whereas if you're bipolar, or manic depressant, or a number of other of mental health issues, you're actually less likely to not only seek it, but even accept it when it's given. And if you don't have a tremendous support network of family and friends in order to help you, you too often end up in today's society on the street. But we also, and I'm not talking about just being homeless, there's a lot of panhandlers that aren't homeless.
I hear you.
And there's also a lot of people so when people say, well, nobody would choose this, and it's like, well, they wouldn't choose that over the alternative if the alternative was you could be equally irresponsible to society, and if I just gave you an apartment and an income, then you wouldn't panhandle, but you're still not willing or able to show up every day at a job and actually participate in society. And maybe the choices that you made and the coping mechanisms that you didn't develop by way of, the way you were raised or things that happened to you contribute to that. But by and large, I look and see there's still tend to fit a demographic.
Well, I definitely agree with your premise that I don't think immigrants are stealing American jobs. If anything, technology is doing that. So no, I don't think.
Yeah, and
I don't think the person on the corner is standing there because he can't be a fruit picker now.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Well,
exactly. He can be a fruit picker, but he chooses. Well, he will stand. He'll make the rational decision to stand on the corner rather than pick fruit. And I'm not saying. Listen, I'll tell you. About a year or two ago, I redid the seam on my roof, right? And I had to do it in July. And I was up there for just one day, 6 hours tarring a roof. And I thought I was going to die. I'm 45 years old at the time, and I literally thought it was going to kill me. I almost fell off the roof. I stood up at one point and was ready to black out from just the heat and the reflection and all of this. And I said to myself, I was like, people do this for 8 to 10 hours a day.
All day, every day.
No wonder there's so much dependency in those jobs. I'd want to smoke crack every night when I came home if this is what I felt like every goddamn day, because that's what my workday consisted of. But go to any roofing operation, and where are they mostly all from? Guatemala. The country we were just talking about that we completely screwed up on behalf of U.S. fruit. And then, they've descended into gang chaos, and they are thrilled to come here and get on that roof every morning. So there's relativity that's involved to it. And to be honest, I don't know what, situation I'd have to get into before I was willing to cut grass in Florida or work on a roof in Florida. And I think that there's a sound argument for, this has been the pathway to success in our country for generations and generations, is that people come from places with less opportunity. They come in and they're thrilled to take the lower end opportunities, and they work their way up. And as cultures, I mean, you look at what the Cuban community has done, you look at what the Puerto Rican community has done, you look at what the Mexican community has done, you look at what the Italian community has done, the Polish immigrants, all the way back and back and back and back, the Irish. That's been the American dream, the success story.
With regard to what you were just saying about the roofing, I mean, part of what our immigration policy needs to include is how to protect these people.
No
also.
question. No question.
And
That-
so
because they get taken advantage of.
and it shouldn't be a progressive
you know,
policy to say that undocumented workers should get health care and should, by the way, get the COVID vaccine as well.
Well,
That shouldn't be
and
controversial
there's-
because entire industries would fall apart if we didn't have this workforce, if they all went away, if they all
and
were
they need to
in
be
distress.
protected in their work, especially in dangerous conditions like that. Working
That shouldn't be
outdoors.
radical to say those things,
No,
right?
No.
I think the mistake the Democratic Party made was during the debates when they asked should they be provided free health care, and every single candidate raised their hand. I think it's very difficult to tell a country in which still like 30 million people don't have health care themselves that
We've
wait a
been
minute.
trying to give
I
it to them. They
understand, but it's
don't want it.
Yeah, they didn't give the option for, hey, should we first have universal health care
Right,
and
right,
then
right.
also extend it
Well,
to
and that's a-
undocumented workers?
Exactly. So
which
you
should
don't
have been-
want universal health care? Okay, we'll just give it
Yeah,
to
but
them.
most of those people in the States weren't supporting universal health care. Most of them were not supporting
I
Medicare
know.
for all, but they raised their hand on that. It's like, do you understand how many people you just push toward the Trump campaign at this
Yeah.
point when you say that, hey, I don't really support Medicare for all, but yeah, let's give it free to all
But a
illegal
lot
immigrants?
of Americans don't support Medicare for all.
Yeah, I mean, it's they got caught showing their conscience there, right? They were saying, "Oh, of course,"
because they
I
don't
should give
want to
it-
pay taxes. They'd rather just die.
They'd rather just pay an insurance company the same amount of money.
Yeah, absolutely.
More money.
That's an
Way
argument.
more
We
money.
already have it. We just have it in the least efficient and most expensive way possible.
Right.
The person goes
That
into the
leaves the most
emergency
people
room.
out.
Right.
Yeah.
They go, instead of giving them that cheap insulin when they're diabetic, we cut their foot off later.
It's like the army, you just
Yes.
and there's no dentist. You just pull the tooth out.
And then, cutting the foot off cost us how much? And how much was the insulin? Wait a minute. It might have been a better idea if we just gave them the insulin first. But God damn it, there wouldn't be any personal responsibility then.
Right.
Stumpy. All right. On that note, I think we'll end it. Been another week, punk rock politics. I'm going to push a button here and hope it's the right one. What do you guys think?
You're on it.
Go
I have
for it.
Yep, that's
All
the
right.
one.
For Brendan Reagan and Elsie fucking Gilmore.
Yes.
I'm Mitch Maley. This has been another edition of Punk Rock Politics. Hey, check us out on YouTube. Check us out on punkrockpolitics.com.
Don't forget to subscribe.
Subscribe, like, share, tell your friends. Get the word out, people. Do your part. Be a good American, and we love you.